the perception or understanding that we have in the meditative state that everything just does itself is, of course, remarkable and very fascinating to go into. It doesn't make any sense at all to the everyday thinking mind, because we're used to a world in which nothing does anything unless it's made to do it. So if I've got a block of concrete in one position on the lawn and I want it to go to another position, it's no good just hoping or imagining that the block is going to move itself, because it surely isn't going to. And that's the way things are in the mechanical world. In the mechanical world, mechanical force is needed to make things change from one state to another. So not only do we have to have the mechanical force to move the block from one place to another, we also have to have the idea in our heads of where we want it to be. Presumably we're going to do something with it, make a shed or a house or something. So we need the forcing, and we also need the understanding of what it is we want, the plan. And we all understand that paradigm because it's the world we live in. The world we live in is based on that. Nothing happens unless it's told to happen. So it's like having a classroom full of unruly children, and if you let them off the hook, if you stop telling them what to do, they'll be all over the place. Mayhem will break out, which can often be the case with children. So we're used to distrusting the world in that way. We could say that there's a form of distrust. We don't trust that the world is going to get it right, so to speak, without us. So we heap up lots of responsibility onto our heads. So possibly the first thing someone might say is, well, that can't be true. Things can't just happen by themselves. Meditation just can't happen. You have to be skillfully making it happen, or something like that. So that's what we would tend to think, because we've got such a huge problem jumping out of the mechanical paradigm into the non-mechanical, which is a kind of a spontaneous paradigm that isn't based on cause and effect. So how on earth does it happen then? How on earth do things run themselves? And possibly the best way to explain it is to say that our perception that we have in everyday life, that we are the boss and that we are in charge, is actually erroneous. It's a kind of an illusion we have that we're happy enough to go along with. So myself as a causal agent, an entity, myself as an entity that possesses this thing called self-efficacy, is a convenient illusion, and we don't ever need to question it in the usual run of things. If we did question it, or if we looked a bit more carefully, we would see that the illusion is an illusion, which is guaranteed to happen every time you look at an illusion. So if you don't want your illusions taken away, definitely don't look at them. So the problem isn't so much that it's impossible for things to happen by themselves, but that they always did, and it's the only way things could happen. And it's just our short-sightedness or our lazy thinking, would be a better way of putting it, that causes us to assume that there always has to be someone in the driving seat telling the process what to do and when to do it. Alan Watts uses the idea of the starting paradox and the stopping paradox to explain the illusion of the causal entity, the self-efficacious ego, or the self-efficacious ego. The idea of the starting paradox is that, supposing I had the decision or the intention come into my head to do something, to start something, and that's how we normally imagine ourselves to go about doing things. We have an intention to do something, then we do it, and that's it. But if we look at it closely, we would see that there's a kind of a thing there that we would get embroiled in a starting paradox if that's really how it worked. If we really had to decide on everything that was going to happen, and that things would never happen unless we decided them. So before I make that decision to start doing whatever it is the hell I'm doing, obviously that decision isn't just going to come out of thin air. I have to make it. So I have to decide to start the action. And there is the regress right there. Because if I have to do everything on purpose, and everything has to be caused by something else, then we never get to the beginning of it, therefore we can never start. So it becomes a horrifically cumbersome and complicated business, just even deciding to mow the lawn, or water the dahlias, or shampoo the parrot, or whatever it is. Even the simplest thing, even to walk across the room, becomes too complicated to do. And when we become neurotic, everyday life does become complicated like that. Everything has to be willed, everything has to be thought about, everything is horrendously awkward and problematical. And not forgetting about the stopping paradox, which I've skipped over. The stopping paradox is if I want to stop doing an action, I can't just stop. I've got to decide to stop, and I can't just decide to stop. That decision can't just come out of thin air. So the rational, purposeful paradigm says it has to be caused. So I have to decide to stop. So it's the same thing all over again. I can never actually stop because I can't keep getting ahead of myself to tell myself to decide to stop. So very clearly what this means is that there's some other factor working there the whole time in our lives that we don't pay any heed to, or that we take for granted without even looking at it. Something that facilitates all of our purposeful actions. Otherwise it wouldn't work. We'd never start and we'd never finish. We couldn't break into the loop, and we wouldn't be able to break out either. So what this thing is that facilitates purposefulness, which is our God, is purposelessness. And purposelessness is equivalent to the Taoist idea of not doing. So we stand back and take an interest in what things are doing before we impose our will on it. So we don't try and force anything. So there isn't the mechanical forcing. And there also isn't the idea, the plan, the concept that we would have of what's happening and what we want to happen. So there's no forcing and there's no preempting. And when we're able to leave a gap for that to happen, the process of being purposeful happens very spontaneously, even though that sounds like a paradox. So what happens when I decide to do something is I just decide. It just comes to me out of nowhere without me having to plan for that eventuality to take place. And we can relate this to James Carse's quote where he says that anyone who plays a game has to play freely. So games are situations where there is no freedom. We can't just do any old thing what we want, because that wouldn't be a game. We have to do what we're supposed to do, what the game wants us to do, what constitutes the game. So we have to obey the rules of the game. And that's fine, because you can't play a game otherwise. It wouldn't be a game and you wouldn't be able to play it, so that wouldn't be any good. So it's understood that games, there's no freedom for us to interpret. We're given the game plan and we go with it. We certainly don't radically reinterpret it as we go along. But as Carse says, we're free. We freely take on this constraint. We freely choose to play the game. I don't have to play the game, but I say, yeah, I will. I'll play the game. So when we play a game, we go from a situation of freedom to no freedom, and we freely choose that. There's no one putting a gun against our head saying you have to play the game. Now there could be, under certain circumstances, we can imagine that, but even so, we don't have to. We're still free not to play it. So we've always got the radical freedom not to obey the rules, because rules don't mean anything, in other words, unless we agree to follow them. And you might say, well, that's all very well, but your man who's got a gun to your head might shoot you then. And indeed he might. Because the thing about rules is there's penalties if we don't obey. And that's why we obey. But if we get sick of the rules and we don't give a damn about the penalties, then we're free. We could also be shot for not playing by the rules. But that's a different matter. In purely theoretical terms, we can see that there is this thing that happens where I freely choose to give away my freedom. However paradoxical that might sound. And when we are playing a game, it is, of course, kind of, as I've just said, it is, of course, possible for me to stop at any time. I could just say, look, this is stupid. I'm fed up. I'm going to go and do something else. I could walk off the pitch mid-game. There's nothing to stop me doing that. In theory. In practice, because of what Carse calls self-failing, I'm not aware of the freedom that I have to do this. because I have made myself blind to that freedom. I've obscured it from myself to see what happens then, so that I can enjoy being in the game and playing the game. It wouldn't be the same to play the game and know the whole time that it's all entirely arbitrary, and it doesn't matter really if I play it or not play it or win or lose. That particular enjoyment that we get from a game wouldn't be there. It would all be very meaningless. It would just be folly. So, although everything is free and games are free, we're free to play them or not play them. When we are playing them, we don't know that we're free, and we carry on as if we are not free. And pragmatically speaking, we aren't free. We have no notion of that freedom that we don't have. Therefore, we're in subjective terms, we're a very long way away from that freedom, because we have absolutely no idea that it's there, and we wouldn't even understand if someone came and explained that there is this radical freedom not to play the game. And by games here, we're not talking about football or tennis or noughts and crosses, which are a special case. They're kind of formal games that we know are games, and when we're playing them, even though we can get lost in them and immersed in them, we know if I'm playing Tiddlywinks, I kind of never lose sight completely. I can't get lost in a game of Tiddlywinks and never come out of it. I don't think that's ever happened to anyone. But I'm not talking about formal defined games that we all know to be games. I'm talking about the game of thinking that there is a rational controller, and that rational controller is essential for everything to happen, and that I am that rational controller. So that's the game that we're all playing, and it's not a formal game because we don't know it's a game, because we never stop playing it, or hardly ever stop playing it. And if we do stop playing it, we don't register the fact that for a period of time we've stopped playing the rational controller game and then come back to it. It'll happen. There are times where we kind of let go and the rational mind isn't governing everything about us. But we don't see those times as being particularly significant, and we don't understand what it means really. We don't think much of them. We don't think that's important particularly. It's like if we go around being fairly serious the whole time, and we have the odd time where we're not being serious, we don't realize that it's that we are more essentially who we are when we're not being serious. We just think that's a little break from being who we really are, whatever role it is that we're acting out. We think that the lack of seriousness is a little break. It's kind of okay. It's like just letting your hair down for a bit. We don't realize that when we do that, that's real, and that when we follow the game rules or act out the roles or personas that we are acting out, that is profoundly unreal. And it's only unreal, it only seems real because we have no longer got the ability to question the rules, and so the rules determine us and can't be questioned, and they give us structure, and that's a type of the meaning in the sense that there's an external structure, so that's extrinsic meaning, and the extrinsic meaning keeps us busy, and we don't see that actually extrinsic meaning is meaningless because it's arbitrarily imposed on us. It doesn't have to be imposed. So what's interesting there is that in our day-to-day lives. We very much do believe that the rational controller is essential and that we are the rational controller, and our worth as human beings depends on how skillful and committed we are at controlling, how good we are at getting the outcomes that we want to get and blocking the outcomes we don't want to get. So it really is true that we don't know about this freedom not to be the rational ego. We really don't know about it. We've given away that freedom. And once we give it away, we don't realize we've given it away because we've given away our freedom to know that we have given away our freedom. So then we're stuck in the game, or stuck in the mechanical world, and everything is about controlling. And yet it can get very overwhelming because really we're taking too much on and our controlling is being overvalued. I'm overvaluing myself as a controller, and that means on an unconscious level I know I've taken on too much and the pressure is getting to me. That may not be the case, that I know about it, but things can flip around really really quickly from the confident, shiny rational controller who seems to be getting on fine and a stressed out controller who's under a lot of pressure but still can't stop controlling, because that's not an option to stop controlling. If we do stop controlling, thinks the rational ego, a very, very bad catastrophe is going to happen. We don't know. It's hard to say exactly what it is. We just know it's really bad. And that's enough to know. If I know something's really bad, I fight and struggle very hard not to let it happen. I don't get all philosophical about questioning why the super bad outcome is going to be so super bad. What I'm really doing is I'm fighting against the awareness of my freedom, not to play the game. But of course I don't see it like that because I haven't examined it enough to realize what it is I'm fighting against. If I were to examine it, I would realize that I'm fighting against my awareness, that I don't actually have to play the game. So this kind of hubristic delusion, where we are the causal agent and we're in control of everything, in control of our lives, maybe in control of other people's lives as well, is a joyless and kind of pressurized kind of a thing, as well as being totally deluded because it's just not true. Whereas if we were to perceive that everything just happens by itself in a perfect way, in a way that I could never replicate. If I did try to replicate, I'd screw everything up in a big way. But if I don't try to replicate it, if I don't try and make it happen myself, it happens superlatively well. And so when I have that perception, obviously there's no pressure to make it make it happen really, really well. There's no pressure. So it's delightfully pressureless. And at that point in time, when I perceive that everything happens by itself and I'm under no pressure to make it happen, it's at that point that I have taken back my freedom And I no longer believe that I have to play the game of the rational ego, which is what happens in meditation, that we stop. We realize we don't have to play the game of the rational ego. Okay, thanks for watching.